If you're ready to take your destiny into your own hands, you've come to the right place. This is The Bulletproof Entrepreneur, featuring interviews with the most exciting and amazing entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Chi Odogu.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the show today. If you love what you hear on today's episode of the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a review and a comment. It helps other great listeners like yourself find the show. And of course, you can always find more episodes of the Bulletproof Entrepreneur podcast at www.odogwu.com. And without further ado, on with the show. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. My guest today is Matt Bertulli. Matt is the co-founder and CEO of Demac Media in Toronto. It's an award-winning commerce agency that serves mid-market and enterprise merchants with online and in-store technology products. They basically help their clients process more than over $500 million in online sales. Matt is also the author of Anything, Anywhere, The Future of Retail and How to Build a Digital-First Roadmap to Growth. He's worked with a lot of technology companies, not only in Canada, but across the US as well. And he also has some very great stories in terms of entrepreneurship coming from an entrepreneurial family in the retail space. So I'm pleased to have him on the show today to tell us a little bit about himself, his business, and his background. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'll always love it. You guys, every podcast host does a much better job of introducing myself than I ever could. So it's so nice to hear. It's like, oh yeah, I did all that. That's great.
That's me, right? Cool. So Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. How did you get on this journey?
Yeah. So I started Demac in 2008. I left. So prior to that, I'm a I guess like self-taught software developer. I've been coding since I was 11. Right.
Yeah.
Super lucky to have a father that brought home a computer at a very young age, and I never sort of gave it up. And that just also lucky in that the whole internet thing became a thing. Yeah. And, I was there early and learning early. So I have time on my side, and I don't take that for granted. Mm-hmm. But in 2008, I was at a company, or 2006, 2007, I was at a company called NetSuite, which is a big ERP software business owned by Oracle now. And we had gone public, and shortly after we had went public, I decided to leave and start Demac, not really knowing what it was going to be, what it was going to do. I just knew that I wanted to do something in and around e-commerce and retail, because I figured that it was going to be even bigger than what it was, almost 10 years ago now. Yeah. So yeah. I always knew that I was going to start something just because I come from my mother is an entrepreneur, my grandparents were entrepreneurs, and it just sort of in the family. And I've always wanted to do my own thing. And as soon as I saw a chance or an opportunity, I sort of took it and I leapt and I did the thing.
I know you said in some other interviews that, you went to college, you were there for about 2-3 months, and then you were like, peace out, I'm not doing this. And you went back to work. And so tell us a little bit about that. Why did you decide to say, hey, man, this probably isn't for me? And then you found yourself in NetSuite, correct?
Yeah.
So why didn't you start up right away? Why did you get a job? Because I don't know how it works in Canada. Would they just hire you just because you have the skills without the degree, or what?
So I think I got a little lucky.
Okay.
So I left I lasted about 3 months in university, mostly because I really disliked the lead professor of the computer science program of the school I was at. I thought the material was dated. Like it was one of those situations where like I'd actually been working for an engineering firm called Hatch Associates as a kid. So when I was in high school, I got a job part-time there, just hacking around on stuff and learning. And by the time I got into university, the material that was being taught was already years behind.
Wow.
And I still think that is the case in some schools, and some schools are better than others, obviously. But for me, I wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't really learning a whole lot, or I didn't feel I was. I think part of that is just like being young and stupid and thinking you know everything.
Yeah.
And the other part of it was probably true, right? Which was, I'd done a lot of this stuff. Why am I here? And at the same time, I had received a job offer, to go work for another company, right? And it was still sort of .com boom days, so there was actually a lot of work for people that could do what I do without needing, the formal education and all that. Now, we all know what happened, right? That thing busted, and I lost that job, and as did a whole bunch of other people. So then I kind of just floundered around and did my own freelance thing and got another job. Like, I just never stopped working as a professional software developer once I left school. And, some of that was just like a series of fortunate events, and some of it was I just hustled my ass off to constantly get better, and it worked, right?
Yeah. You did all that. You hustled. You got the job with NetSuite, and then NetSuite gets the IPO, correct?
Yep.
And then you leave with obviously you had some stock which you were able to sell.
Yep. So once we IPO'd, I had some stock that was vested. I sort of made the mistake. I got married. We decided to get married, buy a house, and I quit NetSuite all inside of the same 4 months. Wow. So I was like unemployed at my wedding for like just starting out my own business, which is sort of fun.
A little pressure, right?
A little bit. And just a little bit. And I think that, I think the NetSuite experience. So the cool thing with NetSuite for me was up until that point, I was working as a software developer, and at NetSuite, I was a pre-sales engineer. Yeah. And that means so I knew I wanted to have my own business at some point, but I also knew that the only experience I had professionally was coding. And, anybody who's ever built any kind of business is sales, marketing. There's so many other functions of a business that I knew nothing about firsthand, particularly in technology. So NetSuite was just this really good opportunity to learn about what the quote unquote front end of business. So without that gig, I don't think the Demac would have gone nearly as well, because I got really, really great sales training at NetSuite. World-class sales organization, still is. Yeah. Bunch of friends that are still there, they know how to sell. And, no NetSuite, I don't know that Demac would be, would have had the early wins that we got, right? Yeah. I don't see it.
So what were some of those early wins? How did you acquire your initial customers in your startup phase?
Yeah, so early on, once I left NetSuite, I started networking like an idiot, online, offline, going to anything and everything in terms of events, meetups, and that was just sort of figuring out how that all worked. At the same time, what we started to do was we started to look at technology vendors, so software companies that were in the e-commerce space, to see if there were companies that we could work with. So rather than rebuild, technology ourselves from the ground up, which was what a lot of companies were doing at the time, I wanted to find something maybe open source, maybe more enterprise, similar to the way that NetSuite had built up this big value-added reseller network. Yeah. I wanted to find a company that we could do the same thing with, or that I could do the same thing with. So early on, we stumbled on a company called Magento, which was an e-commerce platform, and it was really new and it was open source. This is 8-9 years ago, and called them up, spoke to the founder's wife, right, because she was in the business, and they were just sort of starting to build out a formal partner program. So I got in there really early. I was the first partner in Canada, and one of the first in North America, and started to actually get leads and prospects from them. As people called them, they're like, "Hey, do you know anybody in the Toronto area?" And they would refer them over to me because I was the only one for a while. Yeah. So I think that worked really well in our favor. The other side to that is I also was pretty good at what we did, quite good. Yeah. Way ahead of our time. So that just sort of built referrals, and the whole thing just started to stack up. And then on and on, we just kept adding on sales channels and all that good stuff. But early on, it was just, mean, anybody who's ever started will tell you, like, the first 2 years, 3 years is just such a shit show of a grind. Like, you just have to work your ass off, and that's all I did.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that you just have to work so hard, because these days, if you look at the media, a lot of people will tell you, "Oh, I just woke up and I made $1 million in 3 days."
That's
starting
yes.
up.
Yeah, I think, I think I'm in the e-commerce world, right? And there's nothing there. Every time I open up Facebook, it's somebody trying to sell me some kind of, how to start an e-com store and sell $500,000 in 3 months, or like an Amazon store, private label this, and it's sort of becoming laughable, because I think, anecdotally, the majority of the people selling these dreams and these courses are making more money selling the courses than they ever did building the actual business. Yeah. And that when I've actually gone and peeled back a little bit, a few of the layers around some of those, like, yeah, you can just, get up and by 9 a.m. you've made 50 grand. I actually go into those programs and whatever, and I'm like, how much substance is there really, right? Like, is there something I can learn? Yeah. And often most of that stuff winds up, at least in the e-commerce world, winds up being, they're building short-term businesses based on arbitrage or exploitative measures instead of building brands. Yeah. And what I would call like a real business, right? Which takes time and patience and work. One will be around for a long time. One will maybe make you some money in the short term, depending on your goals. And that's how I look at it.
Yeah, that's so true, because it's either one way or the other, and you can't just follow the fad and just try to go so fast at the beginning without putting the right infrastructure and the right processes in place.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a big fan of, and I talk about this in my book, it's like I'm a big fan of doing things at the right time instead of like it's like part of my DNA now. I often tell my team this, where it's not that thing that you want to do isn't important, or that it's not the right thing. It's just not the right time. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it will get to it, but when the sequence determines that we should be doing it. So, like, I'll give you an example. But 2 years ago, I acquired half of a brand called Pila Case, right? Which is a iPhone case company, which everybody's listening is probably thinking, why the hell would you buy an iPhone case company? There's a million of them. The difference is this one was made of a material that was quite proprietary, and that it's a compostable, biodegradable material, right? So bought that, and rather than try and just like really quickly ramp that thing up and sell as much of it as possible at whatever cost, we didn't care, because that's the other thing too. Like, I could sell $1 million worth of this stuff next month, but I would probably lose money doing so. So, is that a good business? No. So for the last 2 years, we've rebooted the brand, redeveloped the product. We've built up very slowly this business to the point now where in the last 12 months, that business has gone from 0 to 7 figures. Yeah. Right. Because it's starting to that snowball that's very slow to accumulate momentum at the beginning is starting to become quite large, and it's really carrying momentum. So I think the message is, like, you can, a young entrepreneur, if I was doing this all over again, the thing I always tell myself is, patience is really, really important. Right. And not listening to the person telling you that, like, you need to go faster. Especially if you're starting a business that has to do with physical things. Like, if you're getting into e-commerce or retail, you got physical stuff. It's not like a digital product or a course, or it's not consulting or any of that stuff. Those businesses have a lot more moving parts and a lot more that can go wrong. Yeah. And doing them slowly and profitably will likely result in you being around a lot longer. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny you should mention that, because I kind of moved to Africa about roughly 2 years ago to start an e-commerce company, And within about 6 months of starting, I had to shut down. A, because the economy turned around, people couldn't afford to buy the stuff. B, the technology partners were just a nightmare to work with. And then C, when things were going so bad, and people are not buying again, what do? You're stuck with inventory. So I'm stuck with
Yeah.
like a container load full of baby products, not knowing how to move them because people are not buying, and I like, man, there's so many moving things you have to think about when you're doing, especially retail and e-commerce. Like you might just find yourself in a situation where you have to hold product until it becomes favorable again for people to buy stuff from you, rather than you raising prices and scaring everybody away. So I
Yeah.
think I think it's good for people to start thinking about things like, patience really is a virtue, and timing is everything, whether you like it or not. Sometimes your time might just be too early or too late.
Yeah. I mean, I've told people this before, and I think I've even written it publicly. Like, our timing with Demac was probably 2 years too early in the Canadian market, because e-commerce didn't really exist when we started the business, which means for the first 2 years, I was trying to like desperately convince Canadian retailers that they should be selling online, and most of them told me to piss off. That was 9 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So, but then within about 2 years, there was like a light switch that went off, and all of a sudden everybody wanted to be online.
Yeah.
And that's when, now, had I not been in it for 2 years slogging it out, I probably wouldn't have been in position to capitalize as quickly as we did on it and grow.
Yeah.
However, during those 2 years, that business struggled. Like, Demac had a hard time in the first couple of years because there's just, the demand wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, same thing, like I'm noticing it again with Pila, where for the first year we were figuring the brand and the product out and who our customer was. And then once we found that customer, it seems like every month this type of customer is growing in number now, whereas before it wasn't. So like timing in terms of market is very huge. Timing in everything else, like how much you buy and who do you hire and when do you hire that person.
Yeah.
I mean, like I timing and luck aren't talked about enough in business.
That's true.
Right.
That's true. I mean, but that's funny to me that you got Canada is so close to the United States, because 8 years ago, like I said, I was still in the US up until 2 years ago, and I just automatically assumed whatever was going on in the US was happening in Canada simultaneously. So it's funny to note that there's still a bit of lag just across the border.
Oh, years worth of lag.
Wow.
Like years. Yeah. I mean, Amazon Canada has a significantly smaller product catalog than Amazon US does. As a consumer, it's very noticeable what we cannot buy. And we're 90% of the Canadian population lives within 100 miles of the US.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it's proximity doesn't mean anything in this game. But yeah.
I want you to talk about your team and your company culture. How did you create the company culture, and how did you assemble the team together to help you scale and grow this business?
Yeah. So there's been a bunch of iterations of that, and it's team building teams is something that I'm very familiar with now, and I do speak about it at events and roundtables and anything I get invited to, where I've gone through, I think, four or five big shifts in thinking about how we organize the business. Like even this year, we went through a massive reorg where we changed how we structured the business fundamentally. It cost us a fortune to do because you lose so much momentum when you do that at our size, right? About 100 people. But I think early on when I was like first starting the company and you're in startup mode, there's definitely that like inherent startup hustle culture. And the culture for us was just born out of this excitement, right? Like new industry, new space, changing landscape, and even today, like our mission is still to help commerce evolve.
Yeah.
That's all. I just want to help it get better.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture is born out of that, right? So the early sort of like excitement-based culture, to me, I always tell people like it's really top down. It started with me. I was like overly excited about having a business and being in business, and like I loved e-commerce and retail, and I still do. And that was the culture. And I think we hired some really good people, young people, early, like between employees 10 and 20, that because I didn't know how to hire people properly, I hired people that I liked and that I would sit down and get a beer with, which meant that the culture was carried on through those people. So they sort of became these like, I called them cultural pillars. They rallied people, they got people excited, they kept everybody motivated, and they just did it naturally because that was the kind of people they were. As we've gotten bigger, say like from 20 employees now to almost 100, or I think we're over 100, I'm not sure. Culture then becomes something that you deliberately need to invest in, right? So like it is a line item on our P&L. We have a culture budget that gets allocated every year, and we have a culture officer. She owns people and the health of our people. We have like social committees, and we do all of the things that a good business should do in terms of investing in people and everything that is culture. We have core values, and we live those core values, and we remind people of them all the time. And that, like those, I think so I'm a, software guy, and I'm a data guy, and those things are intangible and immeasurable. And therefore I've always struggled with them a little bit, but it's hard to argue the results that come and the return that comes from properly investing in teams and culture and people. The organization side, like how you structure teams, is a whole other bag of worms that, takes hours to explain.
Yeah. And I know at one point your wife was working in the company, and then she left to take care of your baby. So, and then you also have a co-founder. So talk a little bit about the partnership in terms of working with your wife in the company. And then after she transitioned, I believe your co-founder transitioned into the company, and how you guys divide labor and how you run the business.
Yeah. So my co-founder, Dimitri, and I, Dimitri, Jen, and I, so Jen is my wife. We all effectively, like, I started the business, and Jen joined me within a year, and then Dimitri joined within, I think, 6 months after that as our co-founder. So my wife doesn't get any credit as being a co-founder, but she was like employee number 2 or 3, and
I would actually say she's employee number 1 because she gave you permission.
Yes. Yeah. She'd probably say the same thing. So I there's a lot of stuff when you're working with your partner, right? And the good thing with Jen and I was there's like this really clean separation in that she's very design and creative oriented. Like she was our creative director for a long time, and I'm development and software. So it's different types of brains, different, nice clean separation of concern, in that she took care of all the things creative, and I took care of all things sort of sales, marketing, BD. And then Dimitri, my co-founder, is our CTO, and he looked after engineering, right? Yeah. So we had this sort of like 3 big parts of the business, all really cleanly separated. And because of that, like, and I keep saying that, like, there's nice clean separation. A lot of that, like, partner conflict that you sometimes hear about, we didn't encounter a whole lot, because there was like, if Dimitri tells me something about like the engineering team or something they're doing, especially today, because I've been at it for so long, I can't reasonably argue, right? Like, I don't have a leg to stand on. I have to trust him. Yeah. Just like on my side of the business, they had to trust me. So it worked well because we just got to go do work, right? And we didn't have like the squabbling and the bitching and moaning that you sometimes, or at least I hear with some friends of mine that have partners, where their roles overlap too much, right? Yeah. So for us, the no role overlap was just a beautiful thing. And there was a harmony there that we had. And Jen and I, like, we worked together for 6 years before we got her out of the business.
You're kind of known for being able to see and spot trends that are coming down the pike. So how did you develop that ability? And then in terms of looking at retail and commerce over the years, how has it changed since you started in the industry, and what do you see as the future of retail and commerce?
Okay, so let me unpack that.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, okay, so something I've said before is I think most good leaders are good readers, right? And while I do read the standard, books on leadership and all the business, all that stuff, I definitely get to it. It's not my main source of information. Like, my preference has always been to read about, read stories and read about businesses, but I don't just stay within my world of like retail and e-com.
Yeah.
I'm a very wide reader. Like, I read about everything from like medicine and medical care to politics to, manufacturing and oil and gas. Like, I read anything and everything. And I do that because I find there's lessons to be learned that can be applied in my very narrow world if I go super wide in my reading. And that helps with the whole and the reason I bring that is because that helps with the trend spotting and like where are things going, right? So we've built this muscle over the year, and I say we because it's not just me, but where we ask a lot of questions about how things might impact or apply to commerce, to trade, right, or to retail, and things that might be at first a little disconnected. So like a few years ago, people are talking about artificial intelligence finally becoming something. And, my partner started to really dig in and say like, well, what is this going to mean for retail, right? Like, what are going to be the applications of this in retail? Even though, at the time it was just a lot of theory, like computer science theory that didn't have an application. Or like, even, Apple releases the Apple Watch when they did, like, all we ask is like, what does that mean to our industry? Yeah. Like, I get that people are talking about like the biometrics and the monitoring and like health and all that stuff, but like there's going to be impact at some point from all this stuff. So I think this is a relatively long-winded answer, but like that's how I do it. I tend to stay out of the books only and reading about like business theory, and I go right after. I spend more time reading about actual real world stories and news, and I try and see how that applies to us. So the second part of your question is like, then what happens to retail, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think like the news this year has been obviously so many retailers shutting down. So, and I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why each one closes, right? But I can tell you, like, the way I look at things right now and what I see is I see a sort of this vice, if you could picture a vice on the retail world. And on one side of that vice, you've got pressure from the top, and that is Amazon, okay? Yeah. And Amazon is basically this big weight at the top of that vice, putting pressure on the top of the whole industry, and they're forcing everybody down to play their game, which is a price war and a free shipping war and a logistics war. Now, the other side of a vice, there's another arm, right? Or another hand. And from the bottom, there's pressure from small niche brands like startups, companies that didn't exist 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But are now, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million more brands that are bringing new products to market in very niche markets. But what they're doing is they're like little bait fish, nipping and eating at the big whales. And those big whales are all of the mid-market brands, the mid-market retailers, even the fortune guys, the big guys that are failing.
Yeah.
They're failing because they've got pressure from the bottom and pressure from the top. And why they're failing is because all anybody focuses on, and even the media, is Amazon.
Yeah.
Right? That dominates the news. Like the number one thing I get requested from my publicist to comment on is the latest Amazon story. And yet we're missing the other side of the equation, which is brands can't fight what they can't see. So they can see Amazon, so everybody's trying to fight Amazon. But big brands can't see the 10,000 or 100, Shopify's got 500,000 customers now.
Yeah.
Businesses.
Yeah.
They can't see those 500,000 little guys taking their nibble too. Right?
Yeah.
And if you think of it when you hear that, think of what that does to the established retailer, like the 50 or 100 store retailer, or the brand that's been around for 20 years. Like, think of the pressure on their business model from two very, very different problems. But they are coming together to squeeze the industry. Great thing is like a whackload of opportunity if you're an entrepreneur. There's so much. But it is creating quite a bit of turmoil.
So would you say the opportunity is in creating those niche brand businesses, or in creating businesses in the Amazon platform? Because it kind of looks to me like you're kind of each brand, or let's say, take for example Amazon. Amazon has thousands of categories, right? And thousands of entrepreneurs in there selling different stuff. So let's say one good retailer in Amazon is taking over, let's call it the batteries category, for example. And then you have, oh my gosh, I forgot the name, Sears. I think they used to create their own battery or something. So they can't fight, they can't fight the guys on Amazon, and they can't fight whatever new guy is creating a solar-powered battery that will last 10 times longer, has been blessed by Elon Musk somewhere or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is like, I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's both.
Okay.
Like Pila is a direct-to-consumer brand, and on our own site, we are a 7-figure brand, but we are also opening up our like store in stores on Amazon, on eBay. Like, we're putting our product into marketplaces where our customers would be. And I think that's what good brands do, is they look at channels and they use the channels as leverage, right? So like, we didn't start out on Amazon because we knew that, if we went to Amazon first, we're an Amazon brand, and we don't want to be that. Like, we want to be something bigger, right? Amazon is going to throw gasoline on the business, which is great. But the trick is, you got to be careful with Amazon, because they've also flat out told the world that, they want to own everything and sell everything. And Jeff Bezos is famous for your margin is my opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So if you're if you're an Amazon only brand, you are a weak company because you're exposed. Right. And Amazon has a history of taking best-selling items like batteries and creating their own Amazon's Basics version of that selling item and completely eating your lunch because you're in their garden. So I think it's both. I think you can use these big marketplaces to your advantage. You can give the marketplace value and the consumer of the marketplace value, which is key. But at the same time, you can capture some of that value for yourself as a brand.
Yeah.
And then take that value and use it as leverage for some other channel.
So why did you write the book, Anything Anywhere? Who did you write that book to speak to?
Man, there's a bunch of reasons why. I think at first I saw the market and I'm like, why are there not very many books on retail? It's the largest industry in the world is commerce. It's like $22 trillion, right? Yeah. Trade, physical stuff. Or it's one of the largest. Like, it's so damn big. And there's not a lot of books on it. There's a lot of marketing books. There's a lot of sales books. But for me, as a retailer from a retail family, like, where's mine? Like, where's my playbook? Yeah. And and there are some, but I wanted to put something else out there. I also wanted to share this is what we've been doing for a while, and I wanted to put out some of our thinking about the space and the market and how it's evolving and what we think brands and retailers need to do or should be looking at doing. And I mean, by no means do I think that like my way is the only way or that I'm right on 100% of the things. I just wanted to put it out there so that the conversation could be had. I think that was like the initial thought, right? I was writing a lot on my own, and I'm a voracious Evernote user, and I just had so much raw material, and I thought like, geez, this could be a book. And I just realized I didn't know how to write a book. So I went through the process and now I have one. So that was it. Like that was the main spark, was just, there isn't much. Let's contribute.
Yeah. And I read through the book. Like I said, I finished it today, and I took a bunch of notes. And one thing that stood out to me was in one of the chapters you mentioned that it's not necessarily what you do, it's how you do it. That's
how and when.
Yeah, it's how and when, and that's what you should leverage to get success. So could you explain and unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean that's this whole like the sequence is greater than the pieces, right? And I think the analogy that we use in the book, and I've got a bunch of them, is like if you were to set out to build a bridge over a river and you just showed up with all the materials and all the people and you just threw all the shit in the river, you wouldn't have a bridge.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that we're in a world now where, like, if you look at how easy it is to in the world of e-commerce, how easy it is to start an online store, and how easy it is to buy apps for that store and buy other software, it's created a problem. And the problem is that like it's too easy to buy it all because it's all cheap and accessible. And what's happened is like you got a bunch of entrepreneurs sitting there scratching their heads saying like, well, I set up my Shopify store and I bought the 15 most popular apps, but I'm still not making any money.
Yeah.
Or I bought all my Facebook ads, but I'm still not making any money. Like, and really, like I'm in this lovely position that I'm grateful for, where I get to see a lot of these businesses quite often. I have access to their analytics, their data, everything. And the pattern that emerged was that they were all doing the same things. They just weren't all doing them in the same order.
Okay.
And depending on the business you're in, there is absolutely the right order in which to approach your problems. And that's where that idea came from, which was, and I'd watched so many companies over the years do the same damn things. They just did them in a slightly different sequence, and that was all the difference.
So
make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So does that mean that if somebody were to have kind of like the playbook or the sequence with which one company did that and applied it in their industry, would it work for them, or would you have to adapt it to?
I think you've always got to adapt. Like there's no one thing that works for everybody.
Yeah.
And I do think that like if you could look into, I mean, that's where we have to be careful, right? Because I think what happens is, big platform company decides to publish a case study on how brand X went from 0 to 10 million in 24 months.
Yeah.
And here are all the tools they use.
Yeah.
But it completely misses what was step one? Yes. What was step two? What was step three? Like which order did they do all of these things?
Yeah.
So instead, you got a whole bunch of people that run out and do what they think is the same thing without the same effect. So I think that's like, it's you absolutely have to think a little deeper about either each piece of technology or each role that you look to hire or each process or system that you put in place. Like it is far more important to think about like, how does it help me now and how does it help me over the next 6 months, and do I even need this right now, or is this something that should come later, which is this idea of like the software roadmap being applied to retail.
Yeah.
I think it's more important to do that than it is to just get it all, right? Yeah. Which is what most startups are doing right now, is they're just buying too much.
Yeah. And when it comes to looking at generating inbound leads for companies, especially in e-commerce, and the rise of content and commerce,
Oh, yeah.
How do you think that's going to play out going forward? Because a lot of people are like, oh, let's blog, 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 no result. Let's post on Facebook, no results. Yeah. Let's tweet, nothing.
Yeah. There's so a friend of mine, Jason Gaynard, says there's never been so much information in the world, and there's never been such a lack of wisdom. And I don't know where he got that from, but it sticks out with me, and I think it applies to marketing a hell of a lot, right? Yeah. In that the amount of content, the internet doesn't need more content. It just genuinely doesn't, right? And you have to think about it that way. So, like, it doesn't need your top 5 list for something. It really doesn't. There's 1,000 of them already, and they're probably all the same anyway.
Yeah.
So, I think if you're going to use content, you really have to approach it like the people that are successful with using content, especially in commerce. The quality of what they put out there is just heads and shoulders above everything else.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's valuable. Like, it's really, really, really valuable stuff. And that's what works, and that's what resonates. Like, every time I hear somebody say, like, well, you create content and then you just go on Facebook and you promote it. And I'm like, well, that's great. But if it's crappy content and the ad is crappy, it's not going to be effective.
Yeah.
So, it's a perfect example of, like, the actual tactic or the tool isn't what creates the results, right? And and I think that broadly, like, forget just lead gen, I think broadly that's a really good rule to live by, which is that the tool itself is not what's going to drive sales. So when you see a piece of software or a course or an advertising platform like a Facebook, and they're selling you that their solution is what's going to drive growth, bullshit. Like, it's completely crap.
Yeah.
Right? It's how you apply it. And it's not the thing itself. It's what you do with it.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we have that filter as entrepreneurs, that when someone's telling you that this thing that they're selling you is the key, it's not. Right? It's probably part of it, but it's not the thing.
Take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny, because I know one of my buddies, Aaron Orendorff, he writes for the Shopify blog, and every time they put out some content on I believe it's Shopify Plus, I'm not sure, but any piece of blog content they put up there, it's always super helpful, and it's not like some flash in the pan shiny object that you just come and read. It's something that it'll still probably make sense 5-10 years down the road when all the tools have changed.
Yeah, they do. They as a company, they do a very good job in creating valuable content. And I think recently somebody, I forget which site, posted, like, they reverse engineered Shopify's growth engine and, like, how they used content to grow this business.
Yeah, I saw that. I don't remember the
It was
name,
amazing.
but
It's such a good read. I if you could link to it or share, I don't know what it is, but I read it and I've got it saved in my pocket. It's freaking amazing.
Yeah.
But I think, like, they are a good example of a company that they give you valuable information, but they don't oversell the information, right? They just give it to you, and then it's up to you to use it, and how you use it is entirely up to you and your business.
Yeah. Great. So as we start to wind down the show, I just want to ask you a couple wrapping up questions, and then I'll let you go. So what does success mean to you?
That's a good one, and it's a hard one to answer. I believe success is highly personal, and I also think that success is very much sits on a spectrum. So for me, it's mostly about having freedom of time and worry to do more of the things that light me up.
And looking back on your career thus far, what's a significant personal failure you've experienced, and how did you overcome it?
So my repeating failure that I've yet to overcome is I am inherently optimistic in the outcomes that I might see. So I always think things are going to turn out better than they do, and that in itself, it creates a form of failure that's tough, right? Because it's like, am I always short of my expectations? Now, I adjust quickly, but I still think that I need to be a bit more realistic in like my expectations.
You already talked about you reading wide and vast. So who are some entrepreneurs you admire, and what's your key takeaway from the people you look up to?
That's a really good question. So I'm a big fan of Gino Wickman, who wrote a book called Traction. So like I run Demac on the EOS, which is the Entrepreneur's Operating System, Traction EOS. Love that. Pretty much like anything that Ryan Holiday writes, talks about. I while I look up to people like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, and I think that the world needs them, I don't go too deep there, just because I think they're so damn unique and so rare that it's unreasonable for the rest of us to even think that way.
Yeah.
So I like all the entrepreneurs that have like real world stories that don't seem like unicorns, like just things that I can learn from, or I think that I can maybe do.
Like the relatable superhero, kind of like Batman, right. Batman as opposed to Superman.
Totally. Yeah.
Cool. What's one thing that's getting you excited to go to work these days?
I'm loving building a couple brands in house now. Like Pila is one, World of Angus is another. I think the future is in small brands. I'm particularly excited about Pila because I'm a bit of a tree hugger, and I love that. If the whole world bought our phone case, we'd have a significant amount less waste on the planet, and that's something that's personally really lighting me up. Is taking all this experience and all this time spent selling stuff and really starting to turn that effort and say, like, can we make better product that is less harmful to this world? And I think that's where commerce needs to go. That's my own personal mission, right? Is that I'd like to see it go there. So I'm really enjoying that right now. That gets me up in the morning pretty happy.
So what's World of Angus?
World of Angus is a pet brand that we recently brought on, and we own a chunk of it. Demac does. So it's worldofangus.com, and it's a fun pet product brand, but it's like makes like really high quality organic shampoo and good quality dog beds, and we've got a little dog park. Like it's just a good brand, and everybody loves pets, so it's a lot of fun to work on.
Yeah, can't go wrong with pets and babies.
No, man. Yeah, not at all.
So my last question is going to be, what's the final word of wisdom you'd want to let people know that are kind of starting their entrepreneurial journey?
I'm going to rip this one off. So all of my best ideas are stolen. Best thing I've heard in the last 5 years, and I continue to repeat it to anybody that will listen, was from Derek Sivers when he said, "Don't be a donkey." And he explains it, and he says, like, look, it's highly likely that we're all going to live a lot longer, especially if you're a young entrepreneur. Like, we've got years and years and years ahead of us, highly likely, right? Unless something fortunate happens, which means we don't need to do everything now, right? And it doesn't all need to be tomorrow. So, I think it's sad when I hear a 22-year-old talk about how they're depressed because they're not yet successful or they haven't yet, Mark Zuckerberg had Facebook when he was 23. Like, okay, that's something that's pretty unreasonable to look up to. But like the whole "don't be a donkey" thing it just resonates so much with me that I now, like, everything I look at, I'm like, do I need to do this right now, or can I maybe do that in 5 years?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I'll probably have time.
Interesting. And with that said, my friend, it's the end of the hour. I really want to thank you for coming. So where can people get the book and connect with you personally?
The easiest thing for everything is just Matt Bertulli, Bertulli.com. That's my personal site. Links to everything: book, Medium, Twitter, freaking Demac, Pila, everything is all sort of, that's my hub. It's my digital self.
Okay, and I'll link to all that in the show notes. All right, thanks a lot for coming to do the show, Matt. I really appreciate you spending the time to share your background, your words of wisdom, your strategy and tactics for building a world-class digital business.
Yeah, no, this is great, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the show today. If you love what you hear on today's episode of the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a review and a comment. It helps other great listeners like yourself find the show. And of course, you can always find more episodes of the Bulletproof Entrepreneur Podcast at www.odogwu.com.